Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome everyone who joins us here in the Holland College of KU Leuven. Welcome also everyone who is following online. I hope many of you are also following us from their nice and cozy home and garden. Welcome to this Lias event. Lias is the Leuven Institute for Advanced Studies. And Lias is organizing this afternoon a public lecture and debate on a very important question related to climate change policy. We are going to talk today about the question of coal. The importance of coal in the global climate change issue is, of course, very important, as a large amount of the emissions originate from coal use. And this debate that we organize today fits within a larger work group of Lias and Metaforum on the social aspects of climate change. We had, in the past 2 days, very interesting discussions with people of KU Leuven, but also with our international visitors, and with Robert from Poland, who was invited to give his opinion and share ideas about the importance of coal for local economies. And I don't have to explain you that coal is an important source of energy in Poland. So we will first have a lecture by Robert. We will then have a reaction by Somanathan from India. And afterwards, we will have a public debate, and all of that will be moderated by Jos Delbeke, who is the moderator of the debate today. Jos, I give you the floor, and you are the editor and the organizer of the afternoon.
Thank you, Johan. And I would like to congratulate Lias in concentrating on the social aspects of climate change policy. And in particular, the transformation of the energy sector that is required, and coal is at the center of it, is going to be a very important element of our conversation. We are facing already, some cracks in our energy sector. We have the fallout of the war in Ukraine that is going to have an impact on all our energy goods we are consuming, and coal is not going to be an exception of that. Now, one word of history. Belgium is one of the first, or was the first country on the European continent to go through its industrial revolution, and it was all based on coal. So let's be very realistic. The wealth of this country and the industrial wealth has to a large extent been built on that commodity that we now declare to be out of the equation as soon as possible. Another brief word, and then I give the floor to Robert, is that you may remember that in Glasgow at COP26, which was a COP with good and less good elements, the 24 latest hours, there was a lot to do about coal. And there was a quite acrimonious debate about whether we should phase out coal, and the compromise found was we should phase down coal. Now, this is just to indicate how coal is a very important energy sector, economic sector, a job generator in areas where sometimes there is nothing else than coal mining activity. So it is a cluster of questions that requires an economic policy that goes way beyond the coal question on itself. So that's the lesson I think we have learned out of that debate in COP26, that it is very easy to decide to move out of coal if your own country has gone out of coal even before climate change was declared to be a problem. But for those who have still a lot of coal and who are engaged in this sector, I think it's a very relevant discussion today. Now, we cannot have a better person to introduce the subject today. Robert Jeszke is from Warsaw, is from Poland, has been involved in climate and energy policy over quite some years, and he is heading today a strategy unit on analysis, and also he is heading a very important project in the Center for Climate and Energy Analysis that he is heading at the KOBiZE, and KOBiZE is the Polish Center for Emissions Management. So I would say, Robert, if you allow me to sketch your position like that, you are an independent thinker, but you are at the same time more or less related to and involved in policy making in Poland, because KOBiZE is the most important center for energy and climate analysis in Poland. So we are very honored to have you here today, and without much further ado, I would like to give you the floor, and I look forward to a good and lively discussion that after your introduction, Robert, we will have Professor Somanathan Eswaran from India, from the Indian Statistical Institute, who has been a privileged observer of the discussions that we were having over the years, also in climate negotiations, but even more so in climate policy in another part of the world. So, Robert, the floor is yours. We are all ears.
Thank you, Jos. It's an honor to be here and discuss this important topic as this coal phase out, which is, let's say, first step of doing the Green Deal and reaching the net zero in 2050 for Europe, of course, but not only in Europe. The coal is a fuel which is still ongoing for many, many years in different areas in worldwide. Just introduced me very in depth, but just to make you broad perspective that we are part of the Institute of Environmental Protection, National Research Institute, which is, this is quite difficult to explain how we are set. But the main point is that we are running under this, let's say, a protection agency, because we are maintaining not only CO2, but also other gases. So we are covering all with the greenhouse gases, we are covering all the processes in Poland. And my team, which is Center for Climate and Energy Analysis, are developing the tools to analyze different aspects of transformation. So it's not only transport, energy sector, agriculture, and global macroeconomic perspective. So we are looking also on issues that are inside of Poland, but also in the area of suburbs, which is, suburbs, surroundings, like other countries in Europe and the worldwide global perspective. So like CBAM, so getting border tax on European borders. Well, so I was asked to talk a little bit about the Polish transformation, especially coal is some say that Poland is a coal-based country, which is used to be the truth, and still we are relying much on coal, but it's changing, and I will show you how it's changing and what are the implications of these changes, because it's always getting from coal is not an easy case. We discussed it for yesterday and today, many cases that are crucial for this transition. So first I will show you this broader perspective, what is the coal employment in the coal sector, and I will end it with that in much more detailed reflections. Then I will go through the Polish transformation and the context of this transformation. Then I will see the couple of slides on current situation on dependency of Europe on Russian fuels. And then we'll go through the transformation of electricity sector, and which is most important at the moment, I think, in Poland is district heating, which coal also plays a significant role. And then with the social challenges, I think we'll stop. So first thing is that if you look at the employment in the European coal sector, then you see that this is mostly divided by European countries. But if you look in details, that you'll see that shares of jobs in coal miners in Europe is mostly based in Europe. So it's from overall employment indicators in Europe, in all EU 27, the coal activities provides jobs for about 261,000 people, and 183 are employed in coal mining, the 48,000 are in coal-fired power plants. So not to miss that the coal sector is not only coal mining, but also energy sector which is based on coal. So you should combine all these, both sectors, to see how the transition should go further. In Poland, the largest number of jobs are in coal-fired power plants, which is 30,000 people, followed by Germany 11,000. But in mining, in Poland in 2050 we had almost 100,000 people in coal mining, followed by Germany to 25,000, which is not the data, current data, because it's from 2015, and at the same time Germany closed the last coal mine. So you see that this transition is going very fast, and even the statistical data are not the best way to look at the, let's say, take some notes what is going on in the sector. So its transition is going very fast. But overall, if you combine all these two sectors, you will see that the employment in these both sectors is the highest number in Europe, so it's almost 50% of people. So going further with this data, if you look at to have some kind of reflection on that, you can look at the productions and the consumption. This is from the left, you will see production of hard coal in Europe between 1990 and 2021. And on the right side, you will see the inland consumption of brown coal in member states. This is quite the same, because the specificity of the brown coal is that you are not moved this on the burning of brown coal is the same spot as you dig it. So this is kind of the same information. So if you look at the production of hard coal in the EU in 1990-2021, so in 90 you had from this period, it's 30 years time, you reduced this production by 79%, almost 80% from 90s. At the same time, you will have the inland consumption or production of brown coal, which also decreased enormously from 1990. And the same time, at the moment, the 97% of total brown coal consumption in EU is taken by 6 countries. So it's Germany 46%, Poland 19%, Czechia 11%, Bulgaria 10%, Romania 6%, and Greece 5%. But with hard coal, we had 13 countries in 1990, but now we have only 2 in 2021. Poland 96% of the total EU production, and Czechia 4%. So with the hard coal, which is for Poland the biggest, let's say, case, and for Germany is the lignite. So this is just to make sure that there are different types of coal. The Polish transformation started like in 1989, but this 1990 is considered as a first day of making market, not steering from back doors. So when we start this, in 1994 we were involved in the UNFCCC process. So we are at the very beginning of the UNFCCC process and the climate policy. We signed up the Kyoto Protocol as well as other countries, but with different target, because we were not part of the EU at the moment. So we joined the EU in 2004 with the target in Kyoto Protocol -6 against -8 that the European 15 at the moment had. But if you see that 2004 is a year before European emission trading scheme started. So that was also very challenging for Poland to start being in line with the all mechanism as the system is from the very beginning. So we had also challenged that very quickly. And if you see how the economic growth of Poland and in comparing to the EU and the world look like from the 90s, then you see that we had this huge, I don't know if it's working, oh, it's not on the TV. So between 1989 and 1991, you see this big drop of GDP growth. And then we started to build economy very quickly. So if you compare it now with the growth of Poland and comparing to the EU or worldwide, then you see that our growth is enormously high. Why is that important? Because in terms of the emissions of greenhouse gases. Of course, at the latest years, you will see the COVID effects, which is enormous. So, because what we perceive in terms of from economical side, we see what is previously the growth of economy was in line with the growth of emission. Now we can see this decoupling. So the economic growth is not following the emissions of greenhouse gases. And maybe if you see it from 1989 or 90s, this reduction is maybe not enormous as the economic growth, but it's not combined with that. So we managed to develop very quickly and faster than other countries around, but we haven't increased the emissions. So we even decreased emission still based on coal. So this means that this transformation occurred in these years. I would like to show you also, it's not energy, but in itself, but it's a transport share in total GHG emissions in Poland and the EU. Why is so important? Because this economic growth is also combined with the transport activity. Because you transport goods, then emission from transport as well is causing the climate change. So you still have a challenge with transport sector. And we have this challenge at the moment in Poland because the average rate of transport share in Poland is enormously bigger than in general in Europe. So if you look at the in the terms of share of the emission from transport sector, so in the EU now the share is around 25%, while in Poland is 70, 90, but we started from 5% and Europe started from 15, so it's like different scale and it's increasing and it will be increasing. So we have to also focus in Poland on transport sector. How about electricity prices? We are based on coal, right? So electricity prices also play a significant role. Of course, the energy is subsidized in Poland. That's why these electricity prices are quite following the same path like in generally OECD countries. And what about the dependency? Dependency on imported fuel for Poland and EU. So this graph shows you that the previously with solid fuels, which is coal, we were independent. So we haven't imported any solid fuels from outside. And if you see that this in 2017 we started to import also from outside because of the price of the coal. We are having internally, and while the same in Europe was always dependence on import of solid fuels. This is with the natural gas is quite different. We are following quite similar path, while the natural gas imports from overall Europe is bigger than Polish one. So Europe increased the dependency on gas much more faster than Poland. While in crude oil, we are in Poland and in general in EU, we are 100% importing this outside of EU. How about dependency on Russia, which is crucial at the current state? If you see the graph from 10 years ago and 2021, so it's around 10 years ago. So you see that this dependency on the coal and the solid fuels are in energy sector. So you should focus on this orange part of the bar. So we were dependent on Russia with the terms of how big is an import, almost 150 billion euros in 10 years ago, and now it's around 100 billion euros. So it's decreasing, but we are at the moment still relying on with 100 billion euros on Russia fuels. Okay, so how about the transformation of the electricity sector and district heating in Poland? This is a historical graph. I will later go with our results of our analytical job we are doing, which is, I can just mention that these are not, what next slides I will show you, these are not official documents of Polish strategies or whatever, but these are just our reflection, analytical point of view with the assumption to get to net zero in 2050. According to the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package. But if you look at the historical situation with the electricity generation from 90s up to 2020, you see that we still rely much more on coal, but it's decreasing over recent years. It's due to ETS and high CO2 prices and the high prices, low prices, let's say, of coal that's supposed to be a couple of years ago. Now it's not the case because the prices of coal are increasing. So it's still it's still in a game. But you see one of crucial things that I don't know if the color below the bars in 2020, 2055, these are these line areas. These are the export of energy from Poland. So this means that we are not only produce for our own usage, but we also exported energy a lot. It's changed these days because we are decreasing the production from coal, but at the same time we need this energy because the demand for energy is increasing from all the economy. So we need to import much more energy than we used to. So this is also from perspective of how fast we can transform the sector is quite important. In terms of numbers, I will tell you that the net export of the electricity was 11 terawatt hours until 2005 yearly, and now we net import in 2020 we got around over 30 terawatt hours. Okay, so what next? This first bar represents the last bar in previous slide. So we got 2020 as a starting point, and we did analysis on how Polish economy can go within the European Union, of course. So we calculate all the European Union level, but focusing on Poland. How we can go with the net zero emission in Poland. So in this case, whole European Union is getting to net zero with the targets, and this is just showing Poland, right? So there are three scenarios, one is BAU, which is a scenario that in 2050 we have a reduction target, overall reduction target around 60%. The reference scenario in 2005 we have a reduction 80%, and neutral scenario, so this new is 90% of reduction. So this is a 90% reduction because the rest of the reduction is by sinks from land use, land cover, land use change. If you see this, how it's progressing with time, you see one thing which is quite important is like the demand for energy is increasing, and this is due to the electrification of the whole process in economy. So it's like electrifying transport sector, electrifying high intensive productions sector, industrial sectors. So you see that if you look at the coal, you still have coal in baseline scenario, but very small amount, right? So it's like in 2040, you have a little bit of coal still with the target, with the, let's say, it's not even current climate policy in Europe because it's a, let's say, less progressive climate policy. So without even changing any policy on climate change, the coal will still go from the energy mix. In reference scenario, you will see this violet part. It's nuclear energy. So I'm supposed to say that these different colors are different energy sources. So then going further, you got much more renewables, much more photovoltaics. You also got huge part of nuclear. You got gas with CCS, which is CCS is a technology to capture the CO2 from the installation and deploy it under the ground. Of course, there are different parts of the usage this, so there are different way of using the captured CO2. But what is also important with technological point of view is the biomass with CCS. This is a technology that is it's not even neutrally, it's negative emission technology. So you absorb CO2 by plants, you burn them, and the CO2 that you are captured and deploy under the ground. So twice you reduce the emission. Of course, not one-to-one, but of course in assumption we calculate like 60% of the efficiency of this process, but this also plays significant role for the other sectors of the economy. So you reduce emission not only in energy sector, but the energy sector is starting to play a role as a supporting other sector where the cost of the emissions are much higher than in energy sector. And in this graph, you will see that from all these scenarios up to 2050, we mostly import energy from outside. Like only in a neutral scenario in 2050, we're starting to sell additional energy outside of the EU. Outside of Poland. How about the driver of this change? It's not, of course, this is not the only driver, but the most people thinking about, okay, what price of CO2 would be in this scenario? So you can see that on the left side, the dynamics of the price of allowances in emission trading scheme developed in time, and you see that it's neutral scenario. The price in 2030 in this analysis is around 100 euro. We know at the moment that the price of CO2 in the market is around 90. So if this situation will not change in future years, then all the process will be faster than I showed you at the moment. So, but according to another analysis, the projections are now that in 2030 the price of CO2 on the ETS market will be around 130 up to 200 euros in 2030. So, but going further in 2050, you will see that this price in a neutral scenario goes to 40. It can be around 40, 400 or 500 or 300. So it's like with other scenarios that other institutions are doing, the price is developing the way. What is also important is this transformation of energy sector. It's how the cost of this transformation will be deployed over the time. So you see that with the Bauer scenario, so the baseline scenario and the reference scenario, the costs are quite similar, much more higher in 2035, 2040 in the scenario with the higher reduction target. But with neutral scenario, all the costs of transformation are in this 10 years period of time, so up to 2030. So if we are now in a line of neutral scenario and neutrality in 2050, that means that Polish economy will and the Polish energy sector will be, the burden of the cost will be the highest in up to 2030. Okay, these are the demand from coming from the scenario. I'll tell you that the neutral scenario causes the highest demand for electricity production, just because electrifying of all the processes in economy, mostly, which is quite interesting. The demand, for instance, for electric cars are increasing enormously. This is the blue part of the bar, and it is around 50 terawatt hours in 2050 in the scenario of neutrality. So 50 terawatt hours, it's a huge part of the energy sector. Okay, and there is another part of this story. This is with the coal. It's district heating. District heating in Poland is based on steam. So you got the steam lines, you burn coal, you heat the steam, and you put it on the pipes, and you've got this, like you have here, exactly. So, and it is, if you know this is local issue. You cannot just let's say put this district heating on a large scale. The efficiency of that is like the pipes can have 40 kilometers long. So the longer they are not efficient, so you don't use that. And this is it was introduced in Poland, district heating, when we mostly when we entered the European Union. That was the solutions to reduce the other pollutants, air pollutants. So we just avoid emissions from households, individual households. We started to build the district heating to cover the emission and better filters and etc. So that would allows us to meet the rules of the European Union regulations. So, and then it's the emission of many pollutants drop dramatically. We still have problem with smog and low emission, but it would be even worse if we didn't do that before. So, but still, you see that the coal is the main part of the production of district heating. It drops enormously from 90 if you compare that, but the role of gas is increasing because of the prices and the emission side of this. But the coal is very important. So again, starting from the 2020, we did the same. This is the part of the same analysis. You will see what is going on with the coal in district heating. So the coal in district heating is starting to switch mostly to gas, and it was done before the situation we have now with the aggression of Russia on Ukraine. So this also gives you a different context, because in all energy transformation now gas starting to play different roles. So we are still working in Europe on how to solve the problem to not be reliant on gas, but at the same time reduce emission. So it seems that for longer time we will use the coal in all the energy sector while maintaining the, let's say, capping the emission that comes from these sources. And these are different technologies, so maybe I will not elaborate on that, but you see that the coal is decreasing in almost all scenario instead of baseline scenario. So even if lower moderate reduction target will be imposed in Europe up to 2050, this will change and the coal will of course, this was also with the prices that you've seen before, so it's like with the CO prices. Okay, so how to make the just transition, the transition just? Because in Europe we use the term just transition, so it's fair and no one is left behind. So what are our challenges? So we see the other parts of this equation. So you got energy sector, and now you can look at the coal sector with the employment parameters. So employment in the coal sector, in coal and lignite sector in Poland decreased over time. So I tell you that in 2050 it was around 100,000, and now you will see that we have around 80. So it's like this still ongoing, and so 20,000 people is in a couple of years. It's a quite huge number. We got around 30 mines now located in Poland, and in 2050 we have, I think, 56. So it's also the number of coal minings is decreasing. So the restructurization of the sector is ongoing. So they are not most, but some of the mines are profitable. So it's not that they are all are not profitable because of they are restructuring, they are changing the portfolio, but of course they are subsidized. So the subsidizing is an ongoing part of the process of keeping mining running. Going further, so we've got the number of people in mines. What is the average age of these people working there? Because the most important thing is not only how to, I don't know, have a source of fuel to the generators, but the most important thing is the social aspect, right? So if you look at the workers, age of workers in coal mining, then you see that the overall age is around 15 up to 40 years old, and then 40 to 50, right? So if you look, comparing this the overall Polish economy, age of workers, this is quite maybe similar, but if you look at the transformation of the sector, then you see that you should be worried about the people below 45 years old, right? Because they will stay and were unemployed in this sector, and you have to do something about it. So you see that the problem is about around 60% of these workers. So you got 80,000 people, and 60% of that is a problem, right? Because you have to do something about it, because the rest will anyway go on retirement. And okay, so how to deploy them in other sectors? You should look what is the education of these workers, right? Because you don't think that the miners will go to the IT sector and start in very not long time starting to working in the IT sector, which is just mostly developing at the moment, right? So there are certain jobs that you can let's say, in short period of time, start to put these people on to work, right? So in mining sector, comparing to the overall Polish economy, they are not higher educated. So this is not exactly the case that you can put miner to the other job that is more, let's say, sophisticated and I had this, we had also discussion in different panel in producers, for instance, of copper, and they are developing a lot because the copper is very demanding for the electrification process, and they can, because deployment of the miners to the copper mining is quite maybe not challenging, but they can absorb around, I don't know, 10,000 people if the market is still ongoing. But this is, most of the people need to be arranged. So what happened to the workers, previous workers that are leaving mining? So the mining are closed, they are going to the market, and what happened comparing to the other manufacturing sectors that people are losing job? So only quarter of workers at that age group become this 25-44 are becoming inactive. So the problem is that it's almost 50% of people leaving mining are entering inactivity. So in terms of social process, they are not looking for a job. So they are just sticking in one place and not looking around. So this is a problem, how to incentivize them to look for the job. The best thing is to find them a job, so train them and deploy to the position that they still working for a long time. So this is the case, not give the job that is temporary, but give the job that is permanent and then further develop. Silesia is the biggest area in Poland when the coal mining is deployed. So if you see the structure of employment in Silesia, you will see that comparing to the 5 years time, that the only sector that evolved in this period was the trade, transport, and IT, right? So other sectors, all other services, a little bit of manufacturing, mining is decreasing, agriculture is decreasing, and the finance of banking and banking is decreasing, which is quite strange because it was the fastest developing sector a couple of years ago. So you see what are the opportunity where these workers can go. So we see the trade, transport, and IT. And IT, as we talk, the IT is not easy place to train the miners. And it is also important to have in mind that the unemployment in different sub-regions on Silesia is differs. So you can have a Tyski, which is around 4% of the unemployment in this region, and you've got Bytomski, which you reach 10% of the unemployment. So this is also, you have to have in mind when you're trying to build a solution for the mining sector. And we did the working paper on how to calculate the loss of workers, because I have to tell you as well, because the work, it's not only problem because you need to train the miners to other sectors. They are earning so much that even in IT sector, the programmers are earning less money than miners. So if you combine this with the education, then you cannot educate miners at the level that he could earn quickly the same amount of money that he used to in mining sector. So this is the problem. The miners always will lose. And what is the loss of this. We calculate this in a CG model. We submitted paper at the moment, so this is only working paper. But if you look with the scenarios, are they quite similar? So there is a scenario of neutrality, so getting in 2050 neutral of Europe. And the base is moderate climate policy. So the GDP loss because of this transformation of the mining sector will be around 0.5% in 2040. We haven't done it up to 2050, but 2040 because there doesn't make sense to go to 2050, and labor compensation will be around -1%. Of course, we got funds in Europe to make this transformation, to help to transform this, but the EU funds that are devoted only for mining is mostly Just Transition Fund and new Social Climate Fund that's supposed to be when the ETS2, so for transport and building, will occur. One thing which is also important that in the another funds we have in EU, which is the Modernization Fund, there's also part devoted for transition of helping to coal miners to transform the sector. Briefly, we have, let's say, coal policy documents that deliver some problems with the coal mining and energy sector. It's a national and a climate plan, which every country has to do within the Paris Agreement and according to EU law. We have a core strategy paper, which is called Energy Policy of Poland up to 2040. Very difficult to negotiate within the government, so it takes a lot of years to release that. It took, I think, 10 years to have this policy in Poland, and when it's finally happened that we have that, then the price of CO2 increased up to 70, 80, 90 as we have now. And the assumption to this was about 40 euros per ton. So this changed everything in the assumption. So all these documents will be changed in upcoming years, I think. And the situation that we have with Russia doesn't help with that. Okay, so getting to the end, what challenges we have in terms of transformation and especially in coal mining? So one thing that we have to ensure the security while achieving the reduction targets within the EU. So this is like security of the supply is a core point of the policy of government. Other thing is that we accelerating within the EU transition and climate policy is accelerating. So we have new proposals, new targets, new technicality of the proposals that gives the higher price of CO2, which means that the transformation is getting faster. And all the effects of that we should supposed to have in mind building the transition strategy in Poland. Russian invasion in Ukraine doesn't help that because it changed totally vision of Europe, like the gas fuel is a transition fuel for transformation from coal to renewables. So it gives at the moment reflection that some coal-based plants will work longer than supposed to, especially the ones 200 megawatts to stabilize the system while introducing much more renewables into the system. So you need to stabilize the system with still with flexible sources. We have to update the policy. And what about the overall vision of Europe. So it has to be said that in long run, reduction of fossil fuels in energy sector is not enough to reach the neutrality in Europe. So we need to focus as well on other sectors, and we need to deploy the new technology which are not in place, which is biomass with CCS, because it's a negative emission technology, huge deployment of CCS and CCU. Electrification of industry, transport sector is a must if you want to talk about the neutrality of Europe in 2050. And to maintain that, you need coordinated and combined sectoral level and global level, let's say, strategies to deliver the strategy and the policies that deliver the neutrality targets. So, and of course, sufficient financial frames. It's not only that you got sufficient financial, because it's impossible to have sufficient financial frames for this, but with that, you need to focus very detailedly how to spend this money. We had the discussion yesterday that the European policy and spending money for different purposes should be much more focused on the emerging issues that are in place at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. I think you give us an exciting overview about what Poland is going under, and it was, at the beginning of your talk, impressed by the fact that Poland became a member of the EU in 2004, and the ETS started in 2005. So climate policy, and membership of the EU coincided to a large extent. And the good news is that you are indicating that Poland has a challenge, but is going through the transition. And I think that is a major element you are indicating. You are not yet there, but nobody would have thought that a number of countries, not only Poland, but Germany, the Czech Republic, Romania, Bulgaria, coal mining and coal-fired power generation in those countries is still very important. I also noted that you mentioned the role of carbon pricing, and in particular, the use of all possible technologies were mentioned in the long-term future. Of course, renewables and energy efficiency and electrification, but also more difficult technologies such as CCS, BECCS, biomass with CCS, also nuclear. I saw in your most ambitious scenario that there is quite an important part for nuclear. And then my third point that I was picking up is the just transition, because moving out of coal creates a problem on the job market. And I think you highlighted well, a lot of the coal miners are relatively young. And so there is a challenge to get them retrained and reskilled. I think that's also something that we sometimes quickly brush over. These are people, not only older workers, but more than half are relatively young workers, and you cannot just dismiss them. So thank you very much for your insight, which I think is very appealing and gives a lot of fruit for our discussion. But before we go to Professor Somanathan Eswaran from Delhi, he has been observing the climate policies of the EU and of Poland, and what we are doing in the context of, what it takes to implement the Paris Agreement. And in particular, also coming to our subject, coal is also still quite important in India. India is a forerunner in renewable energy, but alongside that, coal remains very important. So we are very eager to have your insights and your views on what Robert just brought forward.
Thank you, Jos. I should just preface my remarks by saying these are my personal views. I don't have any official position. So we got a very interesting and very comprehensive picture from Robert about the coal transition in Poland, and it's really very striking that there's been such a large emission reduction in a period in which Poland was making this big transition from socialism to a market economy, and entered the EU within 15 years of that transition. So, of course, the whole world has to make this transition because the whole world has to go to net zero if we are to avoid very severe consequences of climate change. And so I just want to say a little bit. So what is I want to give a contrasting perspective by telling you just a little bit about India, not in much detail, but very quickly. What's very different is that the Polish transition is happening within the context of Poland joining the EU. So there is this transition that's happening, and at the same time, Poland is, Polish policy is integrated because it's in the ETS for those sectors that are in the ETS, and then it's still part of the European Union for the sectors not in the ETS. And there is financial assistance from the European Union for making this transition. If we look at India, so let me just tell you a little bit about it. Firstly, we are talking about a very different level of incomes to begin with. So per capita income, per capita GDP in India at purchasing power parity in 2020 was about $2,000. And for Poland, it's something like $32,000. Okay. So we're talking about a completely different level of income at which this transition is to be made. Nevertheless, it will be made, that much is clear. The Prime Minister at the last COP last year said that India would reach net zero by 2070. Now, that's half a century away, so there's some time to go. But on the other hand, India has a great deal of growth, economic growth in front of it. And with economic growth typically comes emissions. And just for comparison, the world average per capita income is of the order of something like $16,000 per year, which is also about what China's GDP is per capita. And these are in purchasing power parity terms. So if one were to make transfers actually from high-income countries to lower middle-income countries, then in fact that's kind of advantageous because when you convert at current exchange rates, then the gaps are even bigger. Okay, so now on to coal in India. So the largest coal consumer in the world is China, which consumes about half of the world's coal, right? So that's really the big giant. But India is second. It consumes about 10% of the world's coal. The US is third. And coal is very important in the Indian energy sector. It accounts for 75% of India's CO2 emissions. Of the coal consumption in India, about 2/3 of it is in the power sector. And the remaining is in industries of various kinds, steel, cement, bricks, and so on, and many other industries. Now, taking the power sector first, as I said, since that 2/3 of coal demand is in the power sector, the power sector has been changing in India. And the biggest change has been that India had put in a policy for procuring renewables by auctions in 2010. And these policies have been spectacularly successful. There have been a huge decline in costs of wind and solar power, and which are now among the lowest in the world in India as compared to elsewhere. Because, of course, the manufacturing economies of scale in China and all that were also driving costs down, but India did better than most because all the ancillary things happened, developing finance, making it cheap, growing the supply chains, and so on. The result is that the cheapest sources of electricity in India today are wind and solar PV. Right? And new wind and solar PV is cheaper than just the fuel cost of maybe 1/3 or half of the coal-fired capacity in India. Right? And the coal-fired capacity in India is about 200 gigawatts. solar and wind and a few other renewables together are about 110 gigawatts, as of just last year. So that's where things stand now. But of course, as a proportion of generation, renewables are much less because their capacity utilization is much lower. You only get solar power during the day, you only get wind when wind blows, so on. However, the fact that you've had this expansion of renewables with these low prices has put pressure, particularly in the last few years when the prices have come down, have put pressure on electricity prices, downward pressure on electricity prices, and that's meant that the coal-fired power sector has faced competition, and that has contributed to financial stress in the coal-fired power sector. One thing that's there was a large expansion in coal-fired power in India starting about 2005, 2006, which went on for about a decade or so. And this was associated with a period in which there was quite rapid economic growth in the first 10 years of this century. But then that economic growth kind of slowed in around 2012 or so, and that slowing of economic growth meant that many of these expectations which the investors in these plants had about increasing electricity demand were not met. And so, basically there was a lot of infrastructure, and particularly thermal power, that was overbuilt, right? And there wasn't the demand for it. So these plants became financially stressed. So about out of this 200, nearly 20% was officially identified by a parliamentary committee 4 years ago as being financially stressed, meaning that they were not able to pay the interest on their loans. And it's possible, independent studies have suggested that the problem is actually more than what was identified by that committee. And the result of this is, of course, that the coal plant building boom is over. Basically, capacity addition in coal has fallen to almost zero in 2021, whereas the renewables are continuing to grow at about 15 to 20% per year. Okay. And moreover, this is likely to continue because at the COP last year, the PM made this 2070 net zero announcement, but perhaps that's not so very important right now because 2070 is a long way away. But what's much more relevant in the short term is that the PM also announced a target of 500 gigawatts of non-fossil electric generating capacity by 2030, right? So that means an expansion, a three to fourfold expansion, right? And that expansion, of course, it's assumed that the economy is going to grow quite rapidly, and it has been growing quite rapidly as recovery after COVID. But still, basically, that's a huge expansion of capacity, and so the coal-fired power sector is not going to find that demand coming back. And what that implies is that it's going to it's not going to grow, and maybe it's going to start shrinking. Okay, and of course, that's going to depend a lot on policies and to the extent to which it's supported. Because if the free market was left to work, then a lot of this coal capacity is going to shut down. Okay, but the electric power generating sector is not free market. It's very heavily regulated. Okay, but that doesn't mean that coal demand as a whole will decline because there's the other 1/3, right, all the other industries. And those industries are for sure going to grow because they are very coal intensive, right? You need steel, you need bricks, you need cement for construction, right? In a growing economy, construction grows very fast, and it has been in India. So there will be a source of demand growth there. Question is whether the decline of the thermal power sector, when it will come, it's only a matter of time, when it will come and how fast it will come is still uncertain. So we don't know what's going to happen to aggregate coal demand, but it's probably not going to grow much in any case. And eventually it's got to start declining, maybe after a few years, maybe soon. It's not clear. Okay, now, so about the just transition, right? So there will be a transition. Maybe it's not going to happen very soon, or maybe it will happen sooner than we think. So, what about employment. So India had about 460 operational coal mines based on data from 3 years ago. And there were about 750,000 coal miners in India. Right. Now, that's only about 0.15% of total employment in the labor force. So as a percent of the whole labor force, it's a small number. But it's heavily concentrated in a few districts because that's where the mines are, right? And so there can be local macroeconomic effects, which can be quite long-lasting, as we know from various historical experiences, including here in Belgium, when these things close. But there's one respect in which things are different also, which is that many of the coal jobs are not unionized. So the bulk of coal mining in India is in a public sector company called Coal India. And Coal India's direct employees are unionized, and reasonably well paid. But a large fraction of the jobs in the coal mining sector are in the private sector because Coal India essentially contracts with private companies to provide a lot of the workforce. And those jobs are poorly paid and typically not unionized. So just to quote from a study, not mine, but somebody else, which came out this year actually. So this is by Acklin and others. They did a survey in the rural areas of the state of Jharkhand, which is the state with the largest number of coal mines and employees. And they basically did a representative survey in all the districts of Jharkhand of rural households, asking them about the desirability of, would you prefer a job in coal mining or would you prefer a job in, and then they gave different alternatives. One was being a street vendor, which is not typically a secure occupation, you're selling something, or farming, which again typically is not a very remunerative occupation, or third, a solar energy worker, because of course there's this interest in the renewable transition. And what they found was that basically, as far as these households were concerned, coal jobs were considered generally undesirable. So for the same salary, for the same distance from where they were living, and one or two other characteristics, they found that most respondents said that they would take the other job and not the coal job. All right, even though some of these other occupations are not typically, considered attractive in India. And some of these households in their survey were also households in which there was somebody actually working in coal mining. And for those households, the fraction that said they would take the other job rather than the coal job was still more than 50%, but only a little bit, right? So those who are more familiar with the coal industry or knew somebody working in the coal industry did find the coal jobs more attractive. But the overall picture is that the coal mining sector is not considered all that attractive, and that's probably because working conditions combined with pay are not that attractive. And so the situation is somewhat different from experiences in Europe, where you have had coal transitions in the UK, in Belgium, for example, and this is ongoing in other European countries, where you have a highly unionized sector and workers are relatively well paid. And so these jobs are considered, jobs that people don't want to lose, despite, of course, the other dangerous aspects of coal mining and so on. So just to say that the transition, it depends. It varies from country to country, and it varies with the conditions of work in coal mining. In India, those are not very good, and so perhaps if this transition happens and there's sufficient economic growth that employment is growing at the same time, then it can be done fairly smoothly. Although even then, you're definitely going to need financial assistance to those areas because of the local macroeconomic effects. But just to close, I think it's important to recognize that this transition is going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time because there's a lot of economic growth to come, and a lot of that economic growth is going to be emission intensive, unless there's a lot of external financial assistance to redirect those investments into cleaner technologies to avoid those emissions and to help in these adjustment processes. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Sam. First, I would like to congratulate India with the incredible performance on renewable energy. Your opening statement, coal is still there, but the growing part is renewable. And wind and solar is today the cheapest way of producing electricity, also in developing countries like India. And I think that's basically very good news, that sometimes we forget to value how important it is that these new technologies are now available at very low prices and costs throughout the world. But there are many things that were mentioned for the discussion. Let's recall the common theme is the social challenge. Very different, but also very, very analogous. So around that we can have certainly questions. The challenges that Robert was putting up with the war in Ukraine, energy security, climate acceleration, but still coal is there. The other thing, the alternatives need to be important. But I open the floor. Who would like to open the floor? Steph, of course. Steph. I take a couple of questions and then we come back to the speakers.
I have a question about just transition. Can you give an idea to what extent the EU is helping Poland with extra emission allowances? That, of course, that represents something you can sell. If these extra emission allowances are given to some extent in proportion to the emissions you have now, you get actually already a nice starting basis if you reduce emissions, because then certainly with prices that are very high for the moment, if you get them for free, and then it's a strong incentive to reduce emissions, and it's also a lot of money you can use for other purposes. I don't know whether this is correct, but this is probably part of this transition fund. I don't know how you organize it. Can you give us an idea about what is the share of GDP that you're receiving there? Is that small? Is that large? Or are you really counting to a strong extent? If you could say, we committed to the EU to do this, now Poland internally has to do the job and has to reallocate funds within Poland, our money, to Silesia, or so to what extent, what is the participation of the EU? That would be my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I did not introduce Stef Prost, who is Professor Emeritus in economics. I have Karel, you are asking for the floor, and please, come forward with questions after Karel has taken the floor. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for both of you for your very interesting insights. I had some technical questions, but I will keep that for afterwards. I was thinking of another social aspect of that transition, which has not been discussed yet, and was a bit wondering how the situation is in your countries, and it's about the nexus between developing centralized energy delivery. So you mentioned nuclear, that's of course centralized, but solar, wind energy could also be corporations, for example. So is that also an aspect of the transition that you see that consumers are becoming and also considered more as prosumers, having a role in making energy, selling energy, playing on that market, so that there is also maybe a higher buy-in by the people for that transition? Are you stimulating that? Is that part of your view on that transition, and what role could that play?
Very good. Centralized versus decentralized and the prosumer dimension. Who else would like? Johan?
I have another question about the regional restructuring of economies. So if we are looking now at sectors who are definitely losing out employment, profits are being lost and so on. And a very general topic, I think, is that such a transition, we see losses very much concentrated geographically and in time, in a particular sector like the mining. On the other hand, of course, a transition requires also new industries, new technologies, where new jobs are being created. Very often that is more spread out in space and in time. So we often have a bit of a false impression in the sense that we focus on the losses only, whereas there is also gains. Perhaps not as much, but definitely there are also other sectors winning, new sectors. And in that respect, I want to ask you about Poland. For instance, we know that one of our big companies here, Umicore, who is very active in battery technology, had to make a choice about where to build its new battery factory or components for batteries. And in the end, the choice was Poland. Also because of the reason that it gave them access to big wind farms and renewable energy. So they said that that was for them a very important role. So isn't there also a role then for Poland to play, to have a diversified industrial sector that is also playing a very active role in this electric mobility, for instance, or these new energy technologies?
Thank you, Johan. So I start with you, Robert. The just transition incorporate. You want, of course,
Sorry.
the chair of the house. Okay.
Yes, thank you both of you for your very insightful presentations. My point was linking to what Johan had said, and indeed I was struck a bit. First of all, it's an important social problem. 40,000 workers in Poland, 750,000 in India. On the other hand, it's 0.15% of labor force, so it's less than unemployment fluctuations throughout a regular economic cycle. I guess in Poland with 40,000 it's even lower than 0.1%. And I was wondering whether we could also tackle the social challenge, like Johan said, through reconversion programs. And one that springs to mind is the great effort that was done in the Netherlands in the 50s when they closed the state mines and they replaced it with a chemical company, which we all know as Dutch State Mines, DSM. And I checked, and they have 23,000 employees, not all of them in the Netherlands, of course, but it shows, which is more than 0.1% of the Dutch workforce, it shows that conversion can, certainly in these times where lots of new industries are springing up, is an offensive way of tackling the social issue, and could probably bring about more benefits than simply claiming the cost of it. And I'm also I found it very insightful to hear that in India, more than 50% of the coal miners would actually love to have another job, and even a bigger percentage of other people find it the least attractive of jobs. So that again supports the idea, wouldn't we rather go for conversion and new industries than trying to just finance it off the problem or keeping onto it as long as possible? Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. What about the winning part of the equation? That is what is being brought forward. And is there help, operational help from the EU, in particular also in the ETS, which is a dimension that is very prominent. That was very prominent in your introduction, Robert.
Okay, so starting from the first question with the let's say, EU funds, how EU and ETS is helping with the, let's say, transformation or just transition. So it's broader perspective because you mentioned of the allocation you could sell on the market instead of free allocation. So this is energy sector which is not, it's not ever again energy sectors have the free allocation. It's stopped in 2019, I think the last free allocated allowances were in the energy sector. So it's exposed fully on the CO2 prices on the market. So the division of the, let's say, allocation on the funds coming from the ETS are very complicated. So there are different funds I mentioned. So it's mostly just transition, which is devoted to the coal mining sector. But of course, we've got energy fund, the energy fund, which is to transform the energy sector. You of course got allocated allowances on auctioning by member states through the equation that has to take into consideration the GDP per capita. But even go further with that, if you look at the allocation by country, there is no division that is enough for you to cover the transformation of the whole economy. So it's not only energy sector, but overall economy. So ADS is not only about the energy sector, but all the industrial sector, energy sector that are covered with ETS. So just simplifying, the money coming from ETS and the funds are not enough to make transition. So if you combine energy fund with let's say allocation of free with the auctioning revenues that are coming from selling allowances, then it's not enough even to cover the cost of investment in new power plants in Poland. So this is just to summarize, and the rest is still left. So that needs enormous of internal, let's say, support by the government. Coming to another question, if we develop centralized or decentralized system and the prosumers play an enormous role in this transformation, so huge that government supported prosumers from the very beginning, and it has to stop. So it was the calculation was that you are paid more for if you deploy the let's say renewable source of energy and you can sell it to the grid, so you get profitable with the selling. But they has to stop because it started so developing so fast that the energy grids weren't enough prepared to obtain this another energy coming to the grid. So now, of course, it's still profitable to deploy, I don't know, photovoltaics on the roof or etc. But the huge transition in energy grids has to be done to deploy this additional source of decentralized sources of renewable energy sources. So the solution is that you have to combine both of this, so centralized systems that is now with the decentralized systems that are coming into play significant role, because households has to be, let's say, efficient in terms of, as well, with the proposal of the Commission to have ETS2 for buildings and transport. So it even increased over the time. So the sweet spot is how to maintain the technicality of the grid to work with that.
The winning regions,
yeah,
and
so this is the combined questions issue with the losses and beneficial of the new technologies, new sectors that could, new industries that could play a role in the economy. So this is all true. But I just mentioned that coal mining both the coal, hard coal and lignite is around 100,000 people. And they are, like in India, very centralized region, mostly in Silesia. So these are very concentrated regions, relying mostly on this coal mining. So if you now stop them immediately with and differences between India is that they are well paid. So you cannot simply offer them another job which is, let's say, comparable paid to switch from one job to another. So with this payment they have, they always lose as workers. But from other hand, the problem is that you don't simply take a technology or a new industry in the place and said, okay, you can work here. It's most of the industry here that you are deploying is a production of batteries, right? Like it has been said. And Poland had the Solaris bus was invented in Poland. So the Solaris buses are around the globe. Now Solaris, I don't know, it's still Polish, but the invention of the bus, electric bus, was in Poland. So we got this mood of making new industrial, especially battery, in Poland. But it's of course also the is strictly interconnected with the supply you need for these batteries, right? So you don't have this in Europe. You have to import it from Africa or from Asia. Russia has some of the rare materials that you need from batteries. So the scalability of this new industry is also depending on the import of other supply sources from outside of Europe. So the issue is that you cannot simply move one miner to another job, but at the same time, you have to deploy some kind of new industry in this region, not to cause the disturbances that the people will go for many years on unemployment, right? So we don't want them to move to another region because it's not a solution. We want them to start new jobs, making new businesses, but in place they are living, not them move to another. So this is crucial point, and but the thinking about this and programming the financial support to reskilling workers in Poland is ongoing. Myself, I'm in a group that advising National Environmental Fund how to spend money on reskilling people coming from energy funds. So.
Thanks, Robert. Just looking at you some, we have very active entrepreneurs also from the Indian side. Are they looking at climate change as an economic opportunity? Because that was a little bit the suggestion that was made, like the battery development in Poland. Do you see that in India as well?
Yes, very much so. I mean, so the entire renewable industry has been driven by private investors, private firms. And now, let me give you an example. The richest man in India is Gautam Adani. And he basically made his money in petrochemicals and infrastructure, big projects. Including coal mining. Adani has a big mine in the Galilee, coal mine in the Galilee Basin in Australia, which has been very controversial. But he has two companies, probably more than two companies, but they're two big ones. One is Adani Infrastructure, and another one is called Adani Green Energy. And Adani Green Energy last year had something like, stock price went up by a factor of 6. Whereas the return on the infrastructure company was,
flat.
Yeah, basically flat. So that's kind of telling you where the financial markets anyway seem to think things are going. And of course, Adani is a big investor in green energy, right? The second richest man in India, who used to be number 1, but he's slipped to number 2, is Mukesh Ambani and his companies. He has announced plans for $1 billion investment in green hydrogen. So big investors and big companies. The National Thermal Power Corporation, which is a public sector company and it's the biggest generator in India and it has a large fraction of the coal capacity, has announced that they're not going to build any more new coal-fired power plants, and they've been investing heavily in renewable energy. So the industry is clearly thinking that this is where the expansion is going to be, this is where the growth is going to be, this is where the money is going to be made. But it's another story entirely that to actually convert all those plans into fruition, because it needs predictable and supportive policy environment, and it's a situation in which economic growth of late in India has slowed down. We've had a number of shocks, including, of course, COVID being the worst one. So it's a bit uncertain. Plus, we've started to get, more and more adverse events from climate change, and that's only going to accelerate. So there are all kinds of uncertainties. So it all depends on whether, policy can set, and not only policy, but the implementation of policy can set predictable enough way forward, in which case I think that transition will go well. And also, hopefully we can adapt to the climate changes that's coming. But we are going to need assistance. I think that's, we're going to need international assistance because we're still a very poor country. And I think it's something which is underappreciated, of course, for people living here. But it's very much in the interest of Europe and the United States and other high-income countries to pay more attention to what's going on in the developing world. Because if any major country in the developing world, starts to go down a spiral where, you have adverse climate effects, they have a bad effect on the economy, a bad effect on the economy is then followed by, depressed investment, capital flight, those kinds of things, then that can actually lead to, large consequences. I mean, very big international consequences. We actually saw that with COVID. I think that the first world really, really messed up on COVID. There was a huge opportunity at relatively low cost to procure vaccines for the whole world. It was missed, right? And as a result, COVID dragged on for much longer, and we got all these additional variants that we might have been able to avoid had those investments been made. Now, India, relatively speaking, in some ways actually was not so badly off as many other countries because we had vaccine manufacturing capacity. But I think that's the larger story. It's important.
Okay, thanks, Som, and I open up a new round. But I just wanted to reinforce the question that Steph was asking about the redistribution mechanisms inside the ETS. There are some, they are important, they are not enough. That's a point well taken. But also in the sectors outside the ETS, there is a quite an important range of differentiation. Richer member states have to do much more than poorer member states, which is part of the debate we are having in Belgium and Flanders. Is it fair that we have to do so much while other member states like Romania and Bulgaria, etc., have not to do an equal effort? So that is an implicit redistribution of the effort within the overall target of the EU. The richest ones, Sweden, Luxembourg, have to do much more than 40% more reduction, to be precise, by 2030 based on 2005, compared to the countries like Bulgaria and Romania who can keep their level. Of course, their level is lower per head. We have to also say that. But there is quite a fair amount of differentiation of effort, which is a little bit the United Nations principle of common but differentiated that we apply inside the EU. The question that some is making, or the argument that some is making is, of course, the global, dimension. But inside the EU, we are having distribution mechanisms that soften the social impact of the climate policy. But I wanted not to monopolize the floor. I just wanted to take the benefit of the argument that Steph was making. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead. You have the microphone. And, okay, go ahead.
I still like to take the occasion to dive a little bit deeper in the Polish issue. You mentioned on your slides that you would require €1 billion per year to finance the transition. If I remember correctly, by 2050 there would be 40,000.
Only for coal mining.
Yeah, only for coal mining. There would be 40,000 employees left by 2050 in the 1545 age bracket, which have to be financed to of course, to repair the social damages. Are these two numbers related? Is that 25,000 euro per person, or is that part of a bigger? I suppose it's part of a bigger scheme. Maybe you could elaborate.
No, it's not a
that.
scheme. It's just calculation of this, all the exercising, this exercise. It's not the calculation of all the transition costs or energy sector costs. It's only devoted to this mining sector.
To these 40,000 employees. Yeah. Okay.
I'm one of the older persons here in the room, and what we did in Limburg, to give you a situation, let's say in '89, we gave an envelope, we gave a lump sum budget to Campus Steenkoolmijnen. It's just like the Dutch part. Maybe we were not so successful. But actually the idea was we gave an envelope, we gave a budget to continue for maximum something like 10 years. And with this budget, like this could be this 1 billion in Poland, to make a comparison, let's say, make it 7 or 8 billion, you give it to the region, and then you say, you can use that money either to give pensions, extra pension or early pension, early retirement for some of the workers. You give an extra wage supplement for those that are laid off in order to stimulate them to find another job, because that apparently was a problem in Silesia. And then the rest of the money, you can do something like DSM. Okay, so that to put numbers in perspective, that would say, I think we're talking about 1 billion or 10 billion, a fund of 10 billion, with which you can try to deal with the employment, or it's a budget you can mobilize for that. And maybe it's not the most efficient way, but it gives you orders of magnitude.
Okay, so there are precedents that that were created even completely outside the climate change discourse. At the time, that was not yet part of the equation. Katja.
I just would like to raise one point that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's coal is polluting. It's polluting for the climate, but it's also polluting for local air quality. So I was just wondering, and I'm following the debate in Poland a bit, but I don't know anything about the Indian debate. So what about these co-benefits or costs, health costs? People having respiratory diseases and all these kinds of things. Does that play a role at all in more the political debate? Because of course it costs money, but you can also save costs on these other issues. And also, does that trigger any, local protests, some kind of public support for moving out of coal? Or is this, my naive view from where I'm from, and does not play a role?
Okay, important question. I open the round for yes. Please go ahead, and then if there is a final question, and then we are going to sum up. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us a very good highlight of the coal phase out in Poland and also in India. My question is, when it comes to the demography of people employed in the coal industry in Poland, it says about 50% are young people. Is it an opportunity or a challenge for the coal phase out? The possibility of retraining these young people to engage in other sectors? Thank you.
Okay, final question. Okay, so Robert, over to you about co-benefits and about the reskilling.
Yeah, so maybe starting with this, as I said, this is not a simple solution. 20 years ago, we started to reduce the coal, closing coal mining. And the coal miners were, let's say, they were given a lot of money just to give up the job and start working for themselves and start new job and help yourself in a way. So what they did, they bought these days expensive cars, and they went left with nothing, right? So some of them started businesses, but not many. And then when the prices of coal increases, then was the idea, okay, so we need to explore more coal. So we need these workers. And then when they signed the agreement that they are getting this money, they signed the agreement that they won't work anymore in the coal mining sector. And when the prices of coal increases, then we started to explore again the coal miners. So they get back to work again. So it's not the solution to give a person money, help yourself. You need to look forward to stabilize the region. It's not about only these coal miners, it's about their families. These are huge families, so mostly typical coal miners is like the guy he's working and he's got several kids with a wife who's working, taking care of kids. So it's based on his salaries that the whole family is supported. So you need to stabilize the region. You need to have forward-looking, forward perspective. What about the kids that are growing there? So you don't want these kids to go outside of Poland or outside this region. You want them to stay and have the perspective to work in a decent, have a decent job. So you have to look regionally. And of course, coming to another part of this, you allocate money for these reasons in this region. And these regions got this from regional strategies they have. They are allocated money within the Just Transition Fund to look internally because they know the best what is the, let's say, situation in the region. So they got money to put strategy plans to allocate these funds in a region. So, and they are approved by the European Commission. So it's working that way. What about health costs, right? So health costs, of course, is a huge problem with the other pollutants coming from households burning coal. And in Poland, we started several years ago solving this problem. So there are a lot of money, a lot of programs devoted strictly to ban coal-fired heating in private households. And we got like clean air program, which is a great success because we reduce emission of other pollutants very quickly. We've got, all these programs are mostly supervised by the National Environmental Fund we have in Poland. So this mostly the huge financial institution that finance all the environmental programs. And we got My Power, so it is coming back to this prosuments. My Power program is a program that is devoted to prosuments and not only prosuments, to be independent with the power generation in private households. And we started in Poland My Heat, which is another program who is devoted to be, let's say, self-reliant or clean heating system. And what I can tell you that I read recently, I think a couple of days ago, that the number of heating pumps in private households increased from last year by 100%. So we deploying in households enormous amount of heating pumps. So I think this show you the speed of transformation internally on the bottom up that is going from households perspective. But this has to be, supported by the proper and efficient financial schemes.
I would like to add this. is a lot the result of environmental legislation at the EU level. I mean, the clean air standards, like waste and water quality standards, there are transition programs, and in particular due to coal and the heating in households, was one of the first problems that were indicated. But now it's getting further. The problem is now more transport rather than heating. But nevertheless, there is a whole area of legislation on clean air, the Clean Air Act, as Robert was indicating. Now, to my
maybe the same question for India.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some.
So, with regard to the local pollution, it's really a huge issue in India because we have very, very severe air pollution, particularly in North India. I mean, the whole country, but mostly in the northern part of the country, and that includes the capital, Delhi, which gets a lot of attention, but which isn't the only place suffering from very severe air pollution. And the coal-fired power sector is maybe responsible for something like, depends on which pollutant you measure and so on, but if you look at particulate matter, maybe it's about 10% or some of that order, right? Just coal-fired power. And that's, and there've been, so that's another reason that there's a little more pressure on the industry, because in 2015, the government for the first time issued a new set of regulations to control sulfur dioxide and NOx emissions. And but implementation has been delayed. The industry has managed to kind of get the implementation delayed, but it's going to result in additional costs. So those things are being installed. From a public perspective, air pollution is in Delhi. It's kind of got to the point where it is a political issue. It comes up in elections and so on. But in the rest of the country, it's really not. It's a very severe problem. It's the worst in the world in northern India. But it's because it's a poor country, so there's a whole lot of development, jobs, prosperity, removal of insecurity, economic insecurity. These are the things that really drive, politics and elections, and so it's not something I would say that is very important or really significant in national or state level electoral politics, except in a few cities essentially where there's more awareness and there are higher incomes and so on. So it hasn't been, but by the way, it's a huge health issue. So it's been estimated that maybe there are 100,000 deaths a year from coal-fired power stations, right? And so that's really, it's a huge number. So it's a very serious problem. And so I do hope that we succeed in making this transition sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Sam. To my surprise, the first challenge that Robert was putting up has not been raised. Energy security, the war in Ukraine, and more reliance on coal in the short term. I think, any final question on that, Steph?
No, I think I see it less as a problem. Because I believe that on energy markets, there is very often a difference between the short-term response and the long-term response. In the short term, supply, okay, I'm sorry, I'm an economist, supply is very inelastic, so it's difficult whenever you cut natural gas supply, you reduce natural gas supply, there will be very strong increase in prices. But any very strong increase in prices will actually just dampen demand. Okay, that also takes some time. But what we have seen in the past, and we have seen that for oil many times, and we also have seen that for gas to some extent, we have also seen that for coal, if you give a little bit more time, there will be reaction of producers. And so I would think that for gas, I'm confident, but who am I, that in 4 or 5 years we will again have plenty of gas supply from other sources than from Russia. Okay, of course Russia will be knocking at the door to still supply some of its gas, but we will only get it as a discount. Now for oil, I see the same thing. I think we have never seen as much such a diversified supply of oil as we have seen now, much better than 1973, 1989, 79, whatever. And for coal, okay, for coal, maybe different. If we concentrate on a reduction of coal, probably there will still be enough coal supply in the world. So I don't see security of supply whenever you look at a horizon of 2-3 years. I don't see it as a big problem. But okay, it's just my personal view.
Can I ask?
Of course.
What do you mean a little bit of time? Because we know that in Poland especially, we made the gasoport in the Baltic. Baltic pipe will start at the end of this year. So we've got all the capacity to upcoming winter time. We've got 80% of capacity in place, and we started working many years ago to build that independence from Russian gas, because they stopped flowing gas, I don't know, 3 weeks ago or a month. Poland and Bulgaria. I don't know if it's stopped to Finland. It's supposed to be today. So the contract with Gazprom should be stopped at the end of this year. So we prepared for that for many years. So Ukraine situation, war on Ukraine caused by Russia, at the moment just maybe not simplifying things, but it's not from our perspective dangerous thing, but from countries like Germany, it's a disaster at the moment. So when I said that the security of supply, I'm not saying the Polish perspective, but overall European perspective, because this gas is of course used not only in electricity generators, but only in households, but at the other way, you got one grid in the European Union. So this coal burning is also for purposes of other countries. So if, for instance, you got capacity to burn coal because you've got electricity generators, then you export this power to stabilize the system because of renewables, which are in other countries. So, and you pay that because your company paid that price of CO2. Of course, in the agreement, it's not your cost because you earn this money from contracts. But anyhow, the question is what do you mean little of time? So how many years you mean? Because no one thinks that the coal will be running for end of the world in Europe. But
well, I think that's a pertinent comment. How short is the short term? You mentioned 3-5 years. Our targets in Europe are 2030, minus 55%. We are today 2022. So, 5 years is 2027. So, are we then implying, if there is no problem, Steph, that we are not going to deliver the targets? Because if we lose 5 years out of the 8, it's not going to look very nice for the target.
I think what matters is to be consistent in your objective. Okay, so if you want to depend much less on natural gas, it's clear that the rest of the world can deliver, let's say, a reduction in Russian gas. And it can be done, I guess, within 5 years. Maybe it costs you more that when you do it within 5 years than when you do it within 8 years, what the Commission has been promising. But I don't see, for instance, for oil, the fact that Russia, that we do no longer take oil from Russia, I don't see it as a permanent reduction in oil supply in the world, because Russia will sell its oil somewhere else, and we take also our oil somewhere else. So I think we should be very reluctant to see it, the current situation, as a long-term problem in terms of energy security.
No, but I would not disagree. But, the targets are 2030, minus 55%. We are today at minus 25%. So we have to deliver something like 30% reduction between today and 2030. That's the legally binding target. if we lose 5 years out of the 8, then we are going to use more coal inter alia. So it's not going to square the equation. That's the point I wanted to raise. I mean, the period is very short, and the ambition level is very high. And the Ukraine crisis comes straight in the middle and disturbs the short term. You know, that's what Robert was showing with, you know, the phasing out of coal is interrupted. That's what Robert was saying. And it is exactly the phasing out of coal that is a key pillar in the delivery of the target.
But I think if you come back to your 55, your extra objective for 2030, I think we have had a discussion on ETS. ETS promises that the total budget of carbon budget will be respected, and we can respect the total budget of carbon whenever we, even in the electricity sector, increase for a few years the use of coal. So that as such is not a problem. The problem could be household use of coal. There is, but that again is not so important. Okay. So.
Okay, but look, that is all food for discussion for the drinks that I think I can announce immediately after there are going to be some drinks. But, you know, I learned a lot from our discussion today. What happened at COP26, the dispute on coal, has shown in our discussion that it is not just a coal question and an emission reductions. It's a social economic transformation that takes time, and the social element is a real delaying factor because people have to be reskilled and have to find other work and other incomes, etc. I also was encouraged to see in the figures that the transformation towards the low carbon economy is ongoing. Also in member states that still have coal, and I think that's very promising. We were dwelling on the social equation, which may become the impediment for many changes. I think that was implicit also how it's going to be organized, financed, if there are not easy alternatives around. I also noted that Robert was underlining that all technologies are going to be necessary, even the ones that we are not per se very enthusiastic about today. On the renewables and solar and wind and energy efficiency, we like that, but biomass and biomass with carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and storage and hydrogen and nuclear, you know, these are all things that are much more controversial, but we will, and that is what Robert was indicating, you know, as technology stands today, all solutions will be necessary. And a lot of funds, that's the final word, a lot of funds are going to be necessary. You know, reshuffling funds, I think the comments that Som was making about, yes, the transition is going on also in India, but funds are necessary to cater for the problems that are there, I think is a very useful insight. So thank you very much, I learned a lot. I would like to thank Robert and Som very much for their enlightening comments, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to invite you all to the garden room where Lias is offering a drink to all the people who are here tonight.
Thank you.
I forgot.